Hello and welcome to the This Works For Me Virtual Summit. I'm your host, Permpe Watson. I am the director of the Faculty Development Center at Morris State University. In this summit, I will be having conversations with individuals who will be sharing practical strategies that have worked for them. And we hope that you will find many of these strategies helpful in your quest to succeed in higher education and beyond. With me today is Dr. Jean Mandernach. Dr. Mandernach, we are delighted to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So I'm going to yield the floor to you for a moment. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you do?
Yeah, as you already mentioned, I'm Jean Mandernach, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Innovation and Research and Teaching at Grand Canyon University. And so that's a really fancy title for saying I support faculty. I help faculty look at their teaching through a scholarly lens, trying to determine what really works. When we try new innovative approaches in the classroom, whether the classroom is the online classroom or face-to-face, we look at how do we measure and document the impact of those changes. So we're looking at how do we help maximize student engagement, student learning, student success, and really taking a scholarly look at our teaching.
Wow, that's great. And I'm just so excited to get into this interview with you today. It seems as if you have a wealth of experience, and I'm looking forward to it. Now, the title of your strategy is Providing Better and More Efficient Feedback via Text Expanders. For those of us who are not familiar, could you tell us what are text expanders?
Yeah, one of the things our research has clearly told us is students want feedback. In fact, they want more feedback. Feedback is the #1 thing students have told us help them learn. And when we talk to faculty, they tell us they're already spending 40 to 50% of their time on grading and feedback. So the challenge lies when there's only one of us and lots of them. How do we continue to give them good, high quality feedback, detailed feedback in a manner that's efficient, in something that we can do in our schedules? As much as we may want to spend 1 or 2 hours on a student paper providing that really good, detailed, individualized feedback, the reality is we can't. We don't have that much time. And so text expanders are a technology tool you can use to help streamline the efficiency by which you give students repetitive feedback. Now, when I mention this, people often say, yeah, you can't do canned feedback. And that's not exactly what we're talking about here. One of the things that you'll notice as an instructor is the kinds of errors that students make and the challenges that they face are relatively consistent. And so if I was looking at something in my own classroom, like APA style, I'm a psychologist, students struggle with APA style. They always struggle with APA style. And so when I'm grading papers, I might write on every single paper, your running head isn't in the proper format, you need to uppercase this and lowercase this, and here's how you put it in. Well, that piece of feedback isn't individualized to one student. It's the same feedback to every single student that's struggling with that particular challenge. Now, I could just save that piece of feedback, and every time I need it, copy, paste, but that's not efficient. Text expanders allow us to take these pieces of feedback that we use again and again and again, and we can save them and then automate how quickly and easily we can put those into student papers. So a text expander program simply allows you to save those pieces of feedback, and now using either a quick key code that you program in or some sort of hotkey combination that again you can program in, you can now insert that feedback into any student paper where it applies. So text expander programs essentially allow us to automate our use of feedback banks. So as I start to grade students' papers, it's pretty clear which comments are going to be repeated comments, things that I'm going to say to other students. I can now save those pieces of feedback into a feedback bank. And I can automate that with the text expander. So now, rather than either finding it, copying it, and pasting it, I can just hit a little code or a little key combination, and it will automatically insert that feedback into the student's paper for me. So essentially, it makes the whole process easier. It streamlines it. It's nothing magical in terms of making good feedback, but it allows me to take the time I invest in making that feedback useful. I can maximize that time. I don't have to reinvest that time again and again and again in every student paper. I can invest the time once to create a really good piece of feedback, and the text expander now allows me to easily and quickly insert that into any student's paper that needs it.
Wow, that sounds very efficient to me. And I imagine that there might be other similar software out there. And what impressed you to start using this particular, text expander in particular? And how has it worked for you in terms of perhaps the results? Are you, in terms of even students' response to it, how has this strategy worked for you?
Well, what I found is, from a student point of view, they honestly don't necessarily know the difference. And that's the point. I can now give them the same quality of feedback. It's detailed, it's individualized, it's unique to them, it addresses their needs and their challenges, but I can do it more quickly. So when people ask me, well, what has this done for student learning? It hasn't done a darn thing that it wasn't doing before. The difference is I've cut my time into a third. So my grading time, what used to possibly take me up to an hour to grade a student paper, is now down to maybe 20 minutes, because those comments are fairly consistent. Even though not every student makes the same combination of errors, the errors themselves are predictable, and I can save those pieces of feedback. And so the time I'm saving allows me to still give students the same high quality feedback, but it just takes me less time. Students don't know the difference. It's not canned feedback, so they don't feel like it's too generic or too general to help them. Literally, students don't know. All students know is I'm still getting lots of feedback. It's very detailed, it's unique to me, and the instructor's getting it back to me in a timely manner. So the impact on students is that they literally don't know. The impact on me is that I now have the time to invest in other aspects of my teaching. I teach primarily online. So what this does is it frees up time that I can do more engagement in my discussion threads. I can do more content development. I can do more one-on-one outreach. So the time I save by implementing text expanders can now be reinvested into other aspects of my teaching. As I mentioned before, faculty tell us they're spending about 40% of their time on grading and feedback. It's not time wasted because students need this feedback. They like and value the feedback. But if I can reduce that 40% down to 20%, I can now free up a lot more time that I can use for other parts of my teaching that perhaps I wouldn't have time for if I was still having to devote so much of it to the grading and feedback of individual papers.
Well said. I really see what you're saying. So could you help us understand what type of feedback is most appropriate for the feedback bank?
Anything that you think you're going to use more than 1 or 2 times. Now, there are obviously, when we grade students' papers, pieces of feedback that are unique to them, unique to their content, to the message they're trying to say. If it's something, as you're writing it, that's very unique to that student and that student's message, we don't want to save it and we don't want to put it in a feedback bank because we're not likely to use it again. That doesn't mean we shouldn't give them that feedback. We absolutely should. We're just going to streamline the pieces of feedback that are more consistent. So the things that I find most valuable to save and put into my feedback bank. First of all, writing style. Whether you're APA, Chicago style, whatever the writing style you utilize in your discipline, the errors students make in relation to writing style are very general. They go across assignments, they go across courses, they go across students. So I have an entire feedback bank for me of APA style errors, talking about title page format and running head and citations and reference lists and all these kind of things, so I can very quickly help students on some of those writing issues. The other things that work really well for feedback banks are writing issues in general. Things like transitions, opening paragraphs, concluding remarks, being able to summarize, grouping ideas and themes. So general writing comments. Again, I teach in psychology. We do a lot of literature reviews in psychology, and students struggle with just some of the general writing and flow issues. So those are good comments to put in feedback banks. The other kinds of feedback banks I have is I call them assignment-specific feedback banks. In any given assignment, there are going to be things that I can predict that students struggle with. Sometimes it's conceptual errors, sometimes it's the assignment itself, the guidelines and the expectations. But if there's things that I find I'm saying more than a couple times, I'm going to save that into a feedback bank so it's just right there at my fingertips, ready to use and insert with the text expanders. And again, just as clarity, I talk about text expanders and I talk about feedback banks. Feedback banks are just the saved body of information. So the feedback bank can be used in any way. Perhaps you're going to say, I don't want to use text expanders. I already saved my feedback. Well, you're already using a feedback bank. That's just that saved information. You can copy and paste it. You can retype it. That's just saving that feedback so that you can use it again in the future. Mm-hmm. Text expanders then are the technology that automate the use of that information. As I mentioned, if you're already saving your feedback, it's possible to simply copy and paste. It's just not as efficient. So text expanders allow you to save it, add a quick code to it. So now rather than having to go back and find it and copy it and paste it, I print it out. So I have these Excel spreadsheets, and in one column are my codes, and in one column are the feedback, and I just glance, get my code, pop it in. After grading 10 or 20 student papers on the same assignment, I'm not even having to look up my codes because now I can remember which codes I need for which pieces of feedback that I would like inserted into that assignment. So text expanders then really is a generic term. There are a lot of different text expanders that you can use. The text expander is just the generic term for any technology that allows you to make codes that when you type in that code, it will expand it to actually show what was saved behind that code. In essence, it's a little bit like Microsoft Word's autocorrect. When we make predictable spelling errors when we're typing, Microsoft already has a whole bank of these predictable errors, and autocorrect will fix it automatically, just inserts it for us. Text expanders use that same technology, but rather than fixing our errors, it takes that information that we've programmed in advance, and it inserts that anytime it sees that code.
Exactly. Thank you so much for clarifying that. That was very important. So what would you say are some of the most popular types of text expanders then?
Well, let me start with the most basic. I just mentioned autocorrect. You can actually trick autocorrect into being a text expander for you. Right in your Microsoft Word, there's an option, and you can program it in where you say, I want to add to my autocorrect bank. Well, now you can go into that autocorrect bank and you can make your own codes and say, when you see me type this, insert this, and you just save it. So it's possible to start right with Microsoft Word and make your own text expander. If you do it that way, the challenge is anytime you type that code in any Microsoft product, whether it's Word, Excel, Outlook, it's going to work just like autocorrect, and it's going to automatically put in that information. So if you're going to go that route, you need to make sure those codes aren't something you would normally type. So in my world, I make all my codes start with either an asterisk or an AA, because I don't have a lot of words besides aardvark that are going to start AA. So all my codes might say AA title, AA running head, AA paragraph, AA transition. And so now anytime I type AA, whatever that code is, it automatically imports that. So if you don't want to try a new program, you can start by just looking at your own Microsoft Word and how you can use the autocorrect feature. Now beyond that, there are a host of commercially available text expander programs. The one I use is called Phrase Express. It's just one of many. There's Brevity, there's Text Expander, there's Type It In, there's Type It For Me. Truly, if you go and do an online search and just say text expander programs, you're going to come up with 20 or 30. Most of them function just about exactly the same. So I can't tell you, you should use this one over this one. Find one that works for you, whether you're a PC user, a Mac user. The program you choose isn't really that important. The functionality of all of them will be quite similar. Then once you have that program, the advantage is Now it works beyond just Microsoft products. So again, I said you could use autocorrect in a Microsoft product. If you use an actual text expander program, now it works other places. So I use Phrase Express and I can do it right in my LMS. So if I'm grading right in the LMS, I can use those text expander codes right in the gradebook. I can use it right in, the student feedback page, and it's going to import all those codes just like autocorrect would in Microsoft Word.
Wow, that is very useful, Dr. Mandernach. So let me ask you, if there is someone out there thinking, wow, that worked for you, but I'm not sure, I get it, I wanted it, but I'm not sure that I could do this. What would be some just first step that you would just tell this person to just at least try this strategy, because it really has a lot of benefits?
The first thing I would say is start small. I often mention this and people go, oh my gosh, I don't know when I would ever have time to make my feedback bank and to get all that feedback prepared. But I never started by starting and creating my feedback bank. I started by grading a paper. And as I graded the paper, I went to myself, oh, they got their title page wrong again. And so I would type a whole thing about, according to APA style, you need to do this in your title page. Then I looked at that feedback and I went, well, that was pretty good feedback. That's going to be something other people would use. So I highlighted it and I hit save. And I hit save in my text expander program. And then the text expander program pops up and says, what do you want to call it? And I name it and I went on to grading. And the next time I needed to make a comment, I typed it out and I went, oh, this would also be used by other people. So my feedback banks are a continually evolving, building resource that I've never sat down and created independently. I create them while I'm grading. And when I'm grading new papers, I often discover like, wow, for whatever reason, I'm getting this theme again and again that I've never had before. So I'll add to the feedback bank. The other thing I've discovered is over time. So if I go back historically, when I was not using a feedback bank, what I would discover is after a while, I know I don't have that much time. I'm getting tired. The quality of my feedback would just decrease. So the first student might get this really great comment about, here's what you should do, and here's a link to it. And by the time I hit the 30th student writing that same comment, it might literally say like, APA style is incorrect. And that's it. Well now, because I have all this saved, and it's just quick and easy to pop it in, well now I'm actually giving them more feedback, because now I'm going so much faster that I have time to add those individualized pieces, and I have time to add other comments to my feedback bank. So as my feedback banks have evolved, they've grown. But I never started by saying, here's the feedback bank, now I'm going to grade. I just started grading. And so my best advice to somebody getting started would be just start small. Start, and as you're grading, ask yourself, is this something I find myself typing again and again? We actually did a research study with our faculty looking at how many of our comments on an average assignment are only used for one individual student. And what we found is it's less than 5%. The things we write, the errors that students make, the challenges that they have are relatively consistent. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean the same challenge shows up on every student, but it means it shows up more than 2 or 3 times. We're just not making that many comments that are not kind of generalizable to other people that would be taking that course or completing that assignment. So as I go, I'm just always evolving and growing these feedback banks.
Thank you so much for that clarification. Within the last minute or so of this conversation, I know you have been so gracious and you're going to be uploading a couple resources for our viewers. If you want to just tell us briefly what that would be like. And then finally, just could you leave our viewers with an encouragement or a challenge?
Absolutely. So some of the resources that I'm sharing for you today, first of all, is a how to utilize Microsoft Word's autocorrect to make a feedback bank. So if you don't know that you're really wanting to dive in and either purchase or find a feedback bank out there, or excuse me, a text expander program, I'll upload just a how-to video of here's how to use Microsoft Word to create your own text expander feedback bank. I'll also share a list of the commercial feedback bank, or excuse me, text expanders that I'm familiar with. It's not a comprehensive list, but at least it will give you somewhere to start. The other thing I'll share with you is just some general advice for how to organize your feedback banks, how to create name codes, how to make it usable so that when you start trying to integrate text expanders, you don't become overwhelmed with all these codes, all these files, all these comments. The reality is, if this isn't going to save you time, it's not worth it. That's the whole point of the text expanders, is to maximize your time. So it shouldn't be increasing your time. In fact, it should be the other direction. It should be helping you to be able to streamline those repetitive tasks so that you have more time available to devote to other aspects of your teaching.
Exactly, and we all need more time, and anything that can help us to save time, you know, people are always looking for those types of resources. Dr. Mandernach, thank you so much for sharing with us today. You have really given us some practical strategies that we can use right away.
Great, thank you for having me.
Great, and for those of you who are watching, if something was said that resonated with you today, please feel free to share this with others that you think that this conversation might help. All are welcome to subscribe, and of course we will have the summit resources and I'll be linking to that as well. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of this Works For Me Summit. See you soon.